Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I was just looking at the comments. It looks like we have people joining from all over the world, Istanbul, London, Virginia, Canada. So yeah, thanks so much for joining today and for taking the time out. So Q Sheets 101, what you need to know and more importantly, why it matters. Today we're going to dive into very important topics and cover such items such as what should appear on a Q sheet, how can you create them correctly, and what happens after you submit them. So today's panel is in conjunction with Orfium and, of course, the Guild of Music Supervisors. Orpheum has done several webinars on Q Sheets, which are also free to view under the resources tab at orpheum.com. So feel free to check that out as well after this panel, should you have any other questions. As a brief introduction, my name is Bryan Bakke. I'm the Director of Business Development at Orpheum. I work very closely with our label and publisher partners, as well as our broadcast studio and network clients as well on the SoundMouse side. And I'm thrilled to be joining these other fantastic panelists today. I'm going to have them introduce themselves. So we have Neha, Jonathan, and Joel as well. So take it away.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Neha Gandhi. I'm a music coordinator over at Yay Team, working on shows like All's Fair, Grotesquerie, Dr. Odyssey, 911, and excited to be here with you all this morning.
All right, I'll jump in. Jonathan Schultz. I'm a music producer and engineer. And for this panel, I'm going to be talking about my music editing experiences. I've been fortunate enough to work on films going back many years to the Lord of the Ring trilogies, and with Howard Shore, and then more recently with Harry Gregson, the Gregson Williams brothers, and Rachel Portman on some episodics. So it's been a great experience. I really enjoy what I'm doing. I'm happy to share today with you guys.
Well, hi, everyone. My name is Joel Stoner. I'm a senior manager here at Orpheum SoundMouse, where we basically operate Q sheet reporting platforms. And I also, as some of you probably have guessed from the guitars in the background, also write music and compose music in my spare time. So if it's okay, first of all, we thought it might be a good idea to just throw a brief overview of what the SoundMouse Orpheum platform actually looks like, how Q sheets are created in our platform as a point of reference, whether it's through audio recognition or manually created Q sheets. What do they look like? What actually appears in them, and how were they created? So this will just take just 2 minutes. We can just run through the item here. Okay, let me just get rid of all this stuff. Okay, wonderful. So this, essentially what we're looking at, is our originator platform. This is the main command and control center for any of our clients, who could be broadcasters, networks, studios, production companies, how they would see our platform and create their Q sheets. The vast majority of work is done in this productions module, which we will focus on for this very, very quick overview. This, as I said, is the main location where everything is stored. So all these items here are individual Q sheets. Where you see a green marker, for example, so scroll down the bottom, is what status that particular Q sheet is in. This essentially acts as the main sort of page, basically. So if I just minimize everything there, you can see if I just click this little button, you come to the header information. Now, header informations are really important when creating Q sheets. Think of it as the front page of a book. What is the book about? What is the book called, for example? This will hold information such as the product title, what type of production it is. Is it a TV series? Is it a movie, for example? Alternate titles, and also information surrounding who may have contributed to it as well. And once we've seen inside, if we go back here, if we click inside the Q sheet, we open up the book and we see the actual Q sheet itself. And as you can see here, a Q sheet is listing all of the music that's used in the production, and it's got some information related to who has written that music. If I expand this view, we can see that information, everything from title to composer, publisher information, all the way down to identifying numbers such as ISRCs, ISWCs, if applicable, and the all-important and has to be accurate durations as well. Durations are incredibly important. We'll get into all of these details as we go through this panel, as we go around and ask our questions and answer those questions. But essentially in SoundMouse, you can create a cue sheet through 3 main ways. You can manually create a cue sheet, which essentially means you create a header, a new production, you go inside, you can search our database of metadata to create a cue sheet as quickly as possible. You can create it via what's called an EDL, an edit decision list, which is essentially where you download an EDL text file that contains audio file names. You feed that into our system. It matches the audio files that are stored in our system and then pulls up the metadata attached to it. So it populates the cue sheet automatically here. Or our sort of all singing, all dancing version of SoundMouse is creating it via audio recognition. And that essentially looks exactly the same as this. I've just realized I'm on a different workspace. I can just find out it'll look exactly the same. If I just go to here quickly, look at the, go here, there we go. Via audio recognition, it is essentially creating it, if I just click on this here, by feeding in a video asset, running it against our database of music files, and then creating the cue sheet automatically for you. Where you see these green bars here, it represents a track underneath, and all the interested parties are listed here as well. So this is just to give you an idea of a platform that people can create cue sheets within. Let me see if I can go back to here. There is everyone there. We just wanted to show it as a point of reference, just so it gives an idea of how these cue sheets can be created and what actually goes inside of them as well. Why is it incredibly important to create these cue sheets? So to get onto that most important point as to why we're all here, I shall hand back to Bryan, who is the moderator, and I shall be quiet until I'm asked a question. I will stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone. There we go.
No, that's great. Thanks so much, Joel. Actually, I think just to kind of kick this off for our discussion, and thanks so much for sharing that. I think it's important for everybody as a kind of a 101. What is the purpose of a cue sheet, and how is it integral part of the music licensing process? So if you could just go into the purpose and then the process behind that for music licensing.
Yes, of course. So essentially, a cue sheet is the running order of music in a production, which could be a TV show or a film, for example. It lists really important information related to the music rights holders that have composed that music. So the track title, the composer name, the publisher name, the record label, the ISRCs, the ISWCs. These are identifying codes that relate to either the work or the recording. It also contains the all-important durations, how long that particular track was played in a production. Essentially, a cue sheet is a paycheck. It's making sure that the rights holders that appear in that particular production are being paid correctly. From a rights holder's point of view, it is incredibly important to make sure that it is filled in accurately and quickly as possible. From a licensing point of view, it makes sure that you've obviously got all your licenses in place and you've proven that the piece of music that you have licensed separately to place in your production is being reported correctly to a collection society such as ASCAP or BMI to make sure that, again, back-end royalties are being delivered to those rights holders. So in as simple a form as possible, a cue sheet is the running order of music used in a production. It is essentially a rights holder's paycheck. It is incredibly important to get it right, ideally first time, to make sure that you only have to fill in that cue sheet once, and then to make sure that everyone can be paid correctly. And it holds all important metadata, such as track titles and composer names and so on.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks, Joel. I think it's just important to kind of lay that groundwork as we kind of work through the whole process of a cue sheet and how important it is. Jonathan, I want to jump over to you really quick. So what is the process, or maybe your process, I should say, for preparing an accurate cue sheet, and when does that process start to begin?
Sure. I mean, for me, it pretty much begins as soon as I'm on a project. There have been times where I helped a friend and I just worked for 2 days and I did the cue sheet for them. So you can take the final dub stems and measure everything carefully, as Joel's saying. But typically I'm on a project for many months. So as soon as I'm on, I'm starting to track temp score, source that may be temp, or and I'm also trying to keep track of actor singing, humming, and whistling. most music editors keep this on like an Excel sheet, a Google Doc. I lately been doing it in QDB because eventually at some point there's going to be a screener, and so the people who are reviewing a cut are going to want to know what's in that. It's sort of a early form cue sheet, but it's not all the final information. It's usually temp. Um, so you need to be able to generate that. And then this is all before I get to the final mix. There's a lot of information that if you track it, it can save you stress at the dub, and it can save you stress when you're finalizing the cue sheet. I had a couple. Yes, one thing I checked with the music coordinators and music supervisors going into a dub. I like to know the clearance, the usage, any usage or length limitations for a piece of music. To give you an example, I finished a film where a song was cleared for the last scene, and the last chord could land beautifully on the end title card, and it could ring out during the duration of that card. But as soon as the end crawl began, we had to be out. And so it was important because a lot of dub mixers are add a little extra reverb to kind of make something bloom, but it was important to know uh, exactly where that frame was, where we had to be out, and otherwise it would have been a more expensive use. And then the other thing with length is the same thing. You're talking about trying to being aware of when you might be adding expense. So I've had it where, director wants to try pulling out a song an extra 30 seconds. Well, if you know that going, let's say, beyond a minute is going to cost another $20,000, you have to make people aware of it, and then together the director will decide whether to spend that or have you do an edit that's 59 seconds or something like that. Another thing that, again, I've come across is archival clips. Sometimes, again, this is where a music coordinator, supervisor, I'm asking them if everything in it is clear, because sometimes everything is not clear. So we had once CBS campaign footage, and there was a band playing, marching band or something in the background. No one could identify the music, the rights holders. So it was either that we couldn't use the clip or use audio plugins and to remove the music, and we were able to scrub it clean. That was another thing that was a lot of work, but it was done prior to the dub, so we knew we could use that clip. I mentioned the actor singing, humming, and whistling. You want to make sure, again, the music coordinator could tell you if that's covered in an actor's agreement, and we want to make sure that whatever they're whistling is public domain, or it might need to be replaced in ADR with a different humming of something else. So these are all things that I'm aware of before going into a mix. Then, as I said, once you finish a final mix, I go through a few steps, and I'll take a couple minutes just to go through my steps, and then this should be the bulk of what I tell you. I have some notes here. So yeah, basically, I request from the dub mixer their mix session. If I know them well, they're happy to share that. And the reason I do that is because then I can see where there are overlaps. I can see their fade-ins, exactly the start point, because I want to make sure I know something that might be hard to hear in the stem itself. I can see exactly where they started it, where they went out. But you can do it without the dub mixer stems. You just have to really listen very, very carefully. And of course, you have your own stems that you sent to the dub, so you can see where it should be starting or coming out. So then what I do is I usually request the 5.1 and the 2.0 or whatever format, all the master versions for the music. And I also get the print master, because I'm going to be checking that for, again, the whistling, the humming, anything done on screen or off screen by actors. So then I use a tool in Pro Tools called Strip Silence. It chops out everything that's between the music, kind of like you saw in the audio recognition picture that Joel showed. And then I go in with headphones and boost the volume, so I'm sure to be tweaking the ins and outs very carefully. As Joel said, this is very important. So for example, in Pro Tools, you lock it to the frame grid, and I'm listening for any soft entry of a synthesizer or string that the strip silence tool might have trimmed inadvertently, so I pull that out. Or I'm eliminating, guitar amp noise or tape hiss that really is not going to be part of the measurement. Decays, especially, I find, even with the strip silence threshold at its max at minus 96 dB, there can still be more lingering on. And my goal is to give the rights holders the maximum payout, for the actual usage in the project. So let me just see what else here. I mentioned overlaps. I guess I will mention this trick that a lot of music editors and I use, because you can take advantage of how to make this EDL that Joel mentioned as a way to generate values in a cue sheet. One way to do this is sort of checkerboard the music. So I have, let's say, a stereo stem and one cue on top and then another source cue coming in below. There may be a little overlap, and I just checkerboard it. It could be score, source, whatever's in the thing. And I might make a third track for, say, actor whistling Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, whatever it is. So I can have 3 tracks. With those tracks, I can then, in Pro Tools, export a text file. And you check a certain box, include track EDLs, and you selected tracks only, you just have the 3 tracks. And if you name each clip with the cue number, one MO1, one MO2, then that text file can be read by SoundMouse, imported into SoundMouse, and immediately populate all your timecode in and outs, and also the cue numbers, one MO1, one MO2, and so forth. And that's even without really using audio recognition, which is something I haven't used, but I've been talking to Joel about it, which fascinates me. But other than that, let me just talk about how at the very end, so I'm trying to finalize this cue sheet. I've got my overlaps, I've got all my timings perfect. Then I'm again bothering the music editor, I'm a music coordinator, supervisor about the source, because they've gathered all this information, which Neha will explain. And I found that sometimes the record labels, they put typos in the information and it's not always perfectly clear. And so there's a little bit of back and forth trying to get perfect entry into these databases. And another thing you can do, sometimes we even check with the publicly accessible song searches at BMI and ASCAP, just really trying to get that information correct. I've even found that composers, I check with them, because composers often have maybe been listed in a database under a different name that they used earlier, a different version of their name. And sometimes they switch societies and have a different IPI number. That happens pretty frequently where they're switching societies while you're in the middle of the project, So you have to confirm all that stuff. And then my last bit of advice is just, make sure you request from the people who are paying your time card, the time to carefully make and review all these cue sheet entries. You got the time code, you got usage, composer and publisher names, the PROs, the public rights performing rights organizations, the IPI numbers, the owner splits, the percentage splits, and then master recording information, the licensor, master licensor, performing artist, record label, the ISWC and ISRC numbers. So anyway, that was my long speech. Yeah.
No, that's very helpful. Thanks, Jonathan. I think as you ended there talking about licensing information, it's a good segue for Neha. Neha, I'd love for you to just kind of explain how licensing information is gathered for a cue sheet. I think you'd like to step in for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Jonathan, for that in depth. It's also helpful on our side when we, meet with a music editor to sort of figure out what is going on in our show. We do get a list of all of the various different cues, and so we go through that clearance process and get those licenses from various different licensors. At the time that we do get that documentation, we do typically ask for cue sheet information, but again, it's not always clear what's on those documents. So if there's one thing to know at all, it's verify, verify, verify. Make sure every single piece, whether it is a composer's name is spelled correctly, the publishing entity is correct, whether there are different PROs listed, if a PRO is listed at all, going through that and getting an absolute verification on that process from those various different licensors to ensure that the cue sheet information that we gather and then deliver to a music editor is in fact as correct as we can possibly make it. Of course, there are always changes that happen. As Jonathan mentioned, sometimes composers change their PROs and writers change their PROs, or different publishing entities are then associated with a different writer. And so sometimes there is this back and forth that happens to ensure that the correct information is correct at the time of when a show is actually going out and through the licensing process. So it is a lot of back and forth, and it is a lot of verification.
Hmm. Yeah, it definitely is quite involved just to get it all centralized in one place. Um, Joel, I think, Joel and Jonathan, how can you, from that, how can you create a cue sheet correctly? It seems like a kind of a broad question, but I think it's important just to start from there and move up.
Yeah, sure. So it depends on what platforms you have available to create your cue sheet. For example, PRS, if you log on to PRS, you can actually type in cue sheet template, and they will actually allow you to download basically an Excel template with some fields in that you can then populate. So it's really important to make sure the information you put in is correct first time round for all the music that appears within the production. As Jonathan had a really good point about someone whistling, for example, if they're whistling a popular tune, then you may need to make sure you have the right license in place, and you will have to include that. If you're, and I've seen a question about public domain or cover songs, those also will need to be included as well. What's really important is the interested party metadata. So what you can do is you could download that template from a society such as PRS, for example, or you could use SoundMouse, but for another example. And then you could then compare the information you have, and I recommend going to the Collection Society database searches. So ASCAP and BMI have a publicly available repertoire search. I would always take that as a source of truth, what's registered at a society. Basically, type in your track title, type in your composer name, and it will come back with the interested party information. You can then take this information and populate it in the field. So we'll need the correct track title, composer name, ideally have the CAE IPI number. These are essentially your membership numbers for a society, for example. You should see them next to their names, next to the registrations. Share information sometimes isn't always available publicly. So if that's information that obviously we would have on our system, it's readily available because we have it delivered directly from the rights holders. If you can also include items such as an ISWC or a work ID as well, these are incredibly helpful for the societies for when that particular cue sheet is submitted. Following on from that, I would make sure that the durations are correct as well. Please do not round up or round down. It needs to be exact, even to the right millisecond. It's really important it's correct to make sure that the cue sheet is accurate so the societies know how much distribution needs to be allocated to those rights holders. Information I mentioned earlier to include on that front cover is the header information. So that would be the name of the program, date when it aired, for example, any other series information if it's part of a series as well. When it comes to the different types of music that is out there, so it depends. Obviously, you've gone through the stage of licensing it correctly, and for this particular production, you've paid the fees to make sure you can use it for that particular production. There are different types of music. So there is production library music, commercial music, commissioned music, and my most hated phrase, royalty-free music. I don't really like that phrase. It's deeply misunderstood. Essentially, production library music is music written specifically, written for media, but nothing specifically in mind. These are from companies such as West One Music or APM Music, for example. Commercial music is what it says on the tin. It's from your artist, could be independent artists or those part of a large label. Commission music, which is music written specifically for a program. So that is your composers that are writing for, say, a film score or a TV score or music for an advert, for example. They've been specifically commissioned to compose music for that particular production. And royalty-free, this is music that sits actually outside of the PRO's sort of view, basically. People say, oh, there are no royalties associated with this. Well, technically, yeah, from the society, yes. So royalty-free music is music that isn't registered at a society, but there is still a copyright that exists with it. So it still needs to appear on a cue sheet, because if you have a production with all those mixtures of music on, you still need to include that music so the societies know when they receive this information in a cue sheet, they can just ignore it. When it comes to, I should probably mention public domain as well. When it comes to public domain, yes, this still needs to be included, but most of the time the interested parties would probably be listed as just public domain when it comes next to a composer or a publisher, for example. Within SoundMouse, and I'm only using it as a reference point, we have validations to prove if the cue sheet is actually filled in correctly and accurately and ready for submission. It's really important, as I said, I'm going to say this a lot, to be accurate with creating a cue sheet. For example, if you have a song with 2 writers on and you only write the one writer, the one composer, this can cause an issue on the society side. For example, if say Bryan and I wrote a song, it's called Metal Song, for example, and only I am listed as the composer and Bryan is not. But we've registered this song at our society. When that is sent through, a US society, for example, could take that information and go, oh, well, this is the right title, but only one composer is listed. Well, we'll create a new registration and just pay Joel. Now, this is obviously a problem. So making sure not only you include all the writers and their CAE numbers and so on. It's really, really important to do this because it can cause problems later on down the line. I'm seeing a lot of questions here that I really want to answer, but I'm going to wait until the end.
Yeah.
So yes, so accuracy is key when it comes to all of this. You can get these templates from areas such as PRS. You can use a platform like SoundMouse to create the cue sheet, and we have ways of allowing you to quickly create this cue sheet as accurately as possible as well. And the metadata that goes in it and the durations. As I said, don't round up, don't round down. Make sure it is exact. I know it can be time consuming, but it is really important. And the best thing to do is if you do it once, then you know it's sorted for the future. The thing is with cue sheets, and I'm only saying this from experience, is that most of the time, historically, cue sheets tend to be created by a lowly intern or someone that doesn't really understand the importance of what they're putting together. So making sure that you have all this information ready to go so they can fill that in, or using a platform like SoundMouse to create that cue sheet quickly and accurately is really vital to, one, make sure you're not having to go back and revise the cue sheet, which can cause delays to payments to those rights holders. Okay, it could also cause issues with the broadcaster that is actually broadcasting that particular program. They have a certain period of time that they need to report that cue sheet once the program has been aired. If they don't report it in a certain amount of time, that can cause issues between them and the societies. So making sure it's filled in quickly and accurately is a great way to make sure this doesn't actually happen. So I think I might be repeating myself now. So I hope that was informative and everything. If I say the word accurate one more time, I think that's just okay. Yes, back to you, Bryan. I hope that was helpful.
I didn't know if Neha, Jonathan, if you had anything that you wanted to add to that. I know that it was pretty in depth, but if not, that's totally fine.
I'm good.
Yeah, so I think Joel, at the end of that, you kind of made reference to editing and some of that, editing a cue sheet. I think for the group, what is the process of that? Like if you have to edit a cue sheet, either, maybe talk about after you've submitted it or even before you've submitted it. What does that process kind of look like?
It depends on the scenario. For example, if we're looking at let's look at a SoundMouse world first of all, because Orfium SoundMouse world, because this is easiest to me to begin with. So let's say that I'm a broadcaster and I have commissioned a production company to create a cue sheet for a program they're putting together for me. I have invited the production company to create the cue sheet. They've filled it all in. They've sent it back to me for review. I've gone through it because all cue sheets do really need to be reviewed by a human before it is then sent on to a society. And I've noticed that they've made mistakes. They're either missing tracks, that it's the wrong title, not all the interested parties are listed, not all the composers are listed, for example. So we need to make sure that this information is as accurate as possible. So I'm going to write back to them and say, nope, it needs to be fixed. So this is the first level of correcting a cue sheet before it's sent, because someone's noticed it and gone, no, send that back to the production company. They will then have access again to that cue sheet to correct it. They'll fix it, send it back. I see it's correct. Off it goes. Now, let's say there's a scenario where it's already been sent. Now, it depends on the society you're dealing with, to be perfectly honest with you. They may reach out and say that most of the time when they submit the cue sheet, they're going to view that as the correct information, and then they're going to pay out on it. Then a member's going to go, hang on a minute, I haven't been paid for this. Then the membership will raise that, the member will raise that with the membership team at the society. They will then bring back the cue sheet and go, hang on, this isn't correct. And then it's starting to then backtrack to find out who created that cue sheet to then try and correct that cue sheet. As you can already see, this is very, very convoluted and can create a lot of delays, which is why it's so important to get it right the first time, so you don't have this scenario happen. And then essentially they could either ask you to create a brand new cue sheet, which is not ideal, but it could be one with the correct information that overwrites the other one. But again, if that's got errors in, it can cause this whole process to happen all over again. So it really does depend on the scenario who you're dealing with. It is a very convoluted process. There's no other way around it, to be perfectly honest with you, which is why it's important to get it right first time. But there are ways to edit it. You can also make a request to say, oh my God, I've made a mistake. I need to reach out to that society and I need to find that cue sheet and go, I've made a mistake. It needs to be this, this, and this. In my experience, they've either allowed them to edit that cue sheet or they need to submit another one. Again, it really does depend on the scenario, to be honest with you. But within SoundMouse, the SoundMouse world is helpful, very helpful to these production companies and broadcasters, because it allows them to correct this information before it goes. But even if it does go, we do have ways. They do have ways of getting that back to edit it. To make sure that it can be corrected, because you don't want angry rights holders on your tail. That's the last thing you want.
Definitely don't want that. I think from the start, we talked about the purpose and then the process of preparing the cue sheet and then the licensing the information from Neha. I think kind of to go after, you've created it, what happens after you submit a cue sheet for final approval? And then with that, I think, and a part of that question is, what for independent writers, what does that mean to not be registered with a PRO? So you submit it, what happens? And then I suppose if you're an independent, what does it mean to not be registered with a PRO? And I suppose that can go for any of you.
So is it okay if I answer? I don't want to talk over anyone. So once the cue sheet is ready to go, it's submitted to society. So for example, the cue sheet you fill in will be submitted and might be converted into a different format that the society's database can read. It's the simplest way I can explain it. They're essentially then checking the metadata that you've listed in that cue sheet against their registration database. So they're looking at track title, composer name, to then make a match. They're looking at identifying codes, these ISWCs and work IDs I mentioned earlier. As a side note, these, just to mention what they are, ISWC is an international standard work code. This is a unique identifying code that is applied to a work, which is a song, which is the written, what a copyright work, to make sure that it can be tracked internationally and then reported back so those rights holders can be paid. A work ID is the exact same thing. It's a unique identifying code applied to a work. Now, if those identifying numbers are included in a cue sheet, this can then also be added to help speed up the society's auto matching. They'll use that to compare against the codes they have in their database, and then what they can do is they will gather the rights holders' information. They will see that this program was aired X amount of times on this many channels around the country or around the globe, and they will then take the money they've gathered from the licenses that they've gathered from, say, broadcasters, for example, and they will then distribute a portion of that money to those rights holders as royalties at a quarterly distribution time. Sometimes it can be delayed. Sometimes it can be because they need to process this information. So there's one situation. Cue sheet submitted, it is then compared with the PRO's database, such as ASCAP or BMI. It is then, the societies then gather all the performance information. They know who performed on it, the composers and the publishers. They know where it was aired. They can then take the money and then distribute accordingly. In the situation where you have created a cue sheet, say for a program for composers that are specially writing music and they're US based, and let's say a real world scenario that I've had, it's a children's TV program doing episodes on a weekly basis and the music is being written there and then, but there's no registration at ASCAP or BMI yet. This is where the cue sheet is so important, because those composers will export a list of, say, the file names. That'll be what's used to create the cue sheet. So the file names will be the track title names. The interested party will be the composer name. There may not be a publisher. There may be a publisher. There may not be a publisher. If there is no publisher, they can write self-published or unpublished in that field. And then the all-important durations as well. Once that cue sheet is submitted to a society, say, such as ASCAP, they will roll all of that information up under a new registration title, which could be one of the track titles or the name of the program, and they will then pay out on that information. Rolling up cues is not always the most accurate thing in the world. There are issues with it, which we won't get into right now because we could be here all day. But that is essentially another scenario where a cue sheet is submitted where there isn't a registration at a society, but the composers are a member of that society. So there are two things I want to mention really quickly here, is that total duration of music in a cue sheet cannot exceed the total duration of a program, because that will cause the societies to go, hang on a minute, you've got a 21-minute program, but you've got 31 minutes of music. No, I think you've written the durations wrong here. So we're going to stop payment because either someone's made a genuine mistake, which is 99.9% of the time, or there is a very, very small possibility that someone may be manipulating the cue sheet as well. It's always best. A friend said this to me before this call, be honest with it, make sure everything is accurate. That's the way forward. And that leads me on to the next item I wanted to speak, which I think is going to answer the second question, is what does it mean if I'm not a member of a society? So to put it bluntly, you're not going to get any royalties. Simple as that. The royalty fairy won't visit you. I'm afraid you need to make sure that if you are a rights holder and you are composing music, please make sure that you are a member of a society. But this also means for music supervisors as well. The same friend I was just talking to raised a very good point. If you're working with an independent artist that either isn't a member of a society or for some strange reason is refusing to be a member of a society, but they've given you the music to license into your production, there could be a very small possibility that you could open yourself up to liabilities with that music. With a society, at least you know you don't have to worry about it. Their society is protecting the copyright. It's fitted all with the copyright laws of that particular society. And it's much easier to license into a production as well. The composer is a member of a society. So it's much, much easier. It's not to discredit anyone from not doing that. Some people decide they don't want to be a member. That's totally up to them. It just makes everyone's lives a lot easier. But if you have someone that is a composer that's written a piece of music for your film, for example, who isn't a member of a society and is asking you a question, great, when am I going to get my royalties? Well, we still need to create the cue sheet, and the cue sheet is going to have your track title and your name, but it's going to have non-affiliated. The societies still need to be made aware of this, because they need to know if they're a member of their society, a member of a sister society, or an affiliate society. But they also need to know if it's not a member of anything, to know it needs to be ignored by them, or they need to sit there and scratch their heads and go, hang on a minute, do we need to speak to this person to get them to become a member? But when you say to that particular artist, when will I receive my back-end royalties? You go, are you a member of BMI or ASCAP? And they say, no, I'm not. Well, you won't receive any back-end royalties for that. So make sure that they're a member. It helps them out. It helps you out. It helps the cue sheet creation process out. It helps the societies out. As far as I'm concerned, everyone wins in this particular scenario. Yes, so I hope that answers that question. I haven't been rambling for too long.
No, that's great. Thanks, Joel. So I want to leave some time for Q&A because we have about 8 questions. One just came in from John. And maybe I'll read them aloud here, and then Jonathan, Neha, Joel, whoever wants to take them, please feel free. I think based on the time, let's keep the responses brief, just so we can try to get through everybody's questions. So Joel, I know that you talked about public domain, but we have a question about what do you do in a cue sheet when it's a cover of a public domain song?
Write the information in the cue sheet. Make sure that the title is there as well. Ideally, we need the arranger name, whoever arranged it, because there could be a royalty there. It depends. Obviously, you won't get a royalty for the work because it's public domain. It depends on the scenario. I can't say for definite. It's something you'll need to speak to your society about, or the society that that arranger is with, for example. So you'll need track title information, arranger. Public domain is perfectly fine to include as well, but it needs to be included because if it airs and someone has a question about it going, hang on a minute, where's the license for this? What's going on? Was this reported in the cue sheet? Where's the cue sheet? And it's not included. It could cause a lot of unnecessary headaches for everyone to sort of go, no, this is a public domain song. I didn't need to pay anything for it, but I've arranged a version of this public domain song. Include it in the cue sheet. Perhaps talk, if you're the one arranging it, talk to the society to see if there is perhaps some sort of royalty due. There has been in situations that I've been aware of as well. So yeah, please include it with that information.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Joel. The next one is some composers give a title to each cue, and other composers simply use, quote, movie title, BGQs, unquote. Is one method preferable over the other?
Is it okay if I answer it? Sorry. Honestly, it really is your choice, because what we're talking about there is rolled up cues, what I was mentioning earlier. Rolled up cues have pros and cons. If it were me and I was writing 100 cues for a film, I probably would just want to use one registration at PRS, for example. It makes it much easier to title all of them, report all of them, and send that information to, say, PRS to get distributed on. The problem comes with that is if that cue is used, piece of music is used in a different production, you know, it's got the name of the film on, how on earth can I put it into something else? Or if it does appear on YouTube, for example, it could cause issues with reporting from YouTube. So it really is up to you, up to the composer, to be perfectly honest with you. Some societies might say they prefer rolled up, others prefer not. It really depends on the scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Neither are wrong, I wish to say, neither are wrong.
Sure.
Let me jump in on that. Just one thought was, most of the time, composers there's a numbering system, sometimes based on the reel. So you have one MO1 is reel one, and it's the first piece of music. And then typically they come up with a name, because if they've written so many pieces for so many shows, they try to have a unique name. And sometimes it's a line from that scene or something specific to a character in that scene, you know, George sleeps, whatever it is. And so you have, you know, the acronym for the show, whatever that is, a 3-letter, 4-letter thing. And then you have the cue number, and then you have a name, which is usually created by the composers. Anyway, just wanted to add that.
No, that's great. Thanks so much, Jonathan. That's excellent. The next question goes into, I believe, the roll-up process. So what if the song you're using is unreleased and therefore not registered to a PRO?
It depends. It really does depend. Again, so it happens quite a lot where commercial songs are released, they don't have a registration yet. It's a really common thing that's happened. People have gotten a lot better at actually registering it at a society to make sure you've got your tune code, your work ID sorted out. to make sure it can, because sometimes it can take 6 months for it to appear. It's already appearing on the radio. It's already could be appearing in TV and film. So it does depend on the scenario. If it's from an artist that's really big, it probably cause problems with trying to license it. You'll have very probably complicated situations and conversations with the big labels. If it's from a completely independent artist that you know as a friend who's done you a favor to put it in, but they're also going to commercially release that piece of music and register it later on, that's somewhat okay. Again, you'll need to have your own licensing questions, but you will need to include it in the cue sheet 100%. But if it's someone that you as a friend and you put a piece of music in and there's not a member of a society whatsoever, obviously you would have agreed to a licensing agreement beforehand, but you still need to put it in the cue sheet. But as I mentioned earlier, you could open yourself up to certain liabilities, particularly if this particular person has stolen a piece of music and registered it as themselves, or has put or created it through AI. And that's a major problem that can cause major problems with licensing and reporting to societies and in the cue sheet as well, because AI music could be made up of dozens of different pieces of commercial music that haven't given their permission to have that track created.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I want to jump to this question. Can you share a specific story where the cue sheet has errors and how you went about fixing it with the rights holders? I think this is a rather common thing that happens, and so I think this is actually a pretty important one to cover while we still have time.
Is that one for me?
I suppose anybody. This is open forum, so
I feel like I've spoken enough. Please.
Well, I'll say one thing. I mean, I've been so meticulous over all these years that I don't get calls back on cue sheets, but I put a lot of time in. I will say this. One time I was doing season 3 and I noticed an inconsistency a year later in a season 2 one. I was like, wait a minute. Their music went across into the end credits and the usage for that particular episode didn't have it as end credits usage, which usually pays more. So I wrote a note and said, hey, can this still be changed a year later? And they said, well, you have it in your comments. And I was going to mention this, that cue sheets allow you sometimes a space, a sound mouse certainly does. There's a space for a comment about the cue, which can be very helpful. For example, sometimes I'm trying to match the audio name that came from the composers might have a typo in it. Let's say instead of George spelled correctly, they left out the O or something. It looks like so it's misspelled. But we want the cue title in the societies and everywhere to be George, George. So you make a correction, and then I usually put a comment in there that says, audio stem is misspelled as such and such. But anyway, yeah, so you can, you have to, once it's been approved, submitted, and then approved, you do have to ask somebody an administrator, go back and consider a change. And it is cumbersome. I can't imagine having to redo, like Joel's saying, a big percentage of things. It just seems like a nightmare. Yeah.
Neha, did you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think a lot of the back and forth really happens on the front end with us and the licensors having to go back and, whatever they deliver to us, really making sure that that's correct before we deliver it to the music editor or to the studio, as however that may be. We've had only a couple instances where we've had to go back to either a music editor who's wrapped, and so to the studio to be like, hey, we need to update a name that was perhaps like left off or something that's changed. But for the most part, a lot of that has to be verified on the front end. And so when it does get to the music editor's hands or to the studio's hands, we're doing our best to make sure it's pretty complete there.
That's great. Joel, did you have anything else to add on top of their comments for that?
No, it's all good.
Okay, great. This is another question that came in. If the administrator of a composition is different than the publisher, which entity should be listed on the cue sheet?
Both. Make it as accurate as possible. Seriously, both. Make it as accurate as possible.
Great. Okay, fantastic. And then on the accuracy for cue sheets, what are the steps that are taken to protect ghostwriters slash music arrangers who have written the entire cue while the lead composer is given 100%?
That's going to probably be a question more to ask a society. So really, you know, the source of truth is on the society's database. If the ghostwriter has written the song and registered the song under either their own name or a pseudonym name, for example, then it exists for them. You know, it depends on what the deal is between them and the artist, for example. You know, if the artist has said, no, you own 100% of the publishing of the work, right? I own 100% of the recording, that's different. You know, if they've gone, no, we split it 50-50, it will be registered as such. If information is conflicting, then that is up to the societies to sort out, and they may chase whoever created the cue sheet or those members to find out exactly what's going on. So it really does depend on the situation related to that ghostwriter.
Okay. Okay, great. I think we have time for two more, so I'm going to just go through these really quickly. A film I composed for prepared a cue sheet, not using cue titles, but rather the film title and time code for each cue. Film title _ music _ time code. Is that one of the ways in which cue sheets are prepared?
Can I see that in writing? Is that?
Yeah, it's in the comments.
So time code, I'm assuming you're referring to duration. You've put all of that in the one cell. Ideally, it needs to be separated out. So you've got a track title area and a duration area, in and out times, basically. When does it start? When does it end? And the total duration. That is preferred. Accuracy and clarity on it as well. If you've put all of it in together, if that's sent to a society, they might believe that that's actually the track title. You know, but it's got 20 different track titles because all the time codes are different as well. So that's just something to consider.
Okay. And then we actually have one here that just came in I think is important. Does the music supervisor ever submit a cue sheet to a PRO directly?
I think it just depends on the project. For projects where you're working with studios, not necessarily, but if you are on somewhat of an indie project, that could potentially come up within your responsibilities. It just depends.
Okay.
Hey, Bryan.
Yep, go ahead.
Just one question for Neha or Joel. You know, I know how important the ISWC numbers are and the ISRC numbers, but most of the time they don't seem to be a part of the information that music supervisors are able to get. And yet it seems like then the societies must just, okay, look at the artists involved and still be able to pay them. I feel like I only get those numbers like 5% of the time. And I'm sure in your mind, you'd like it to be 100%. Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of loops back to what I was mentioning earlier about tracks, even really big artist tracks being released and not having a registration yet. It's somewhat common for that to happen, or it was a while ago. And then ISWCs took absolutely ages to be applied to registrations, like months and months later. But it's gotten a lot better. So the moment a track is registered and approved, an ISWC tends to appear pretty much right away these days, which is a massive improvement, massive improvement. They are optional. They're really important and really, really helpful to include. Like, it's really helpful for tracks that have been there for a while. For newer releases, the importance is the accuracy of the track title, the composer names, the publisher names, how it's spelt as well, making sure it matches up exactly to the registration name. That's what the system on the PRO side is going to be looking at first. Track title, composer name, for example. Yeah.
I think then there's one more before we have time. I know somebody else said that they wish we covered this. It is about foreign artists. So would you apply the same logic with a friend who isn't part of a PRO with foreign artists, especially those in countries without their own royalty collection organizations?
Yeah, still needs to appear on the cue sheet. Still definitely needs to appear on the cue sheet. I would probably speak to that particular person and say, look, if you're in a territory that doesn't have a collection society, but you want to be a composer and you want to be an artist and a composer, sign up to another society. That's absolutely fine to do. You may have to explain a little bit in detail as to why you're doing it, but it certainly helps if the music is being aired already in a particular territory, particularly either on a big film or an independent film or something like this. If I was in that situation, I would advise them, yeah, go speak to BMI, become a
Mhm.
member, and they'll go through their own processes to get that person signed up, and it makes it easier for that person, that composer.
Well, I know we have 2 minutes left. I suppose this might be a good place to end it so that we can say thank you for everybody joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jonathan, Neha, and Joel. I hope that you all found this very interesting and helpful. It really is supposed to be designed as a 101. If you have any sort of questions, I put all of our emails in the chat. Please feel free to follow up with us if you have thoughts, questions. That's what really we're here for, to help this make be educational. Um, I'll leave it to Robert. I know he said that the recording might not be released, so I'll leave that direction to him. But again, thank you all so much for joining us today.